BU School of Education, how are you? All right. One more time, a little more enthusiasm. All right. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Dean, first of all, thank you very much for your mentorship, your friendship, and your leadership here at the school, as well as in the Boston Public School System. We're deeply appreciative. Graduates, I bring you greetings on behalf of Mayor Martin J. Walsh. He is very proud of everybody in this room and wants to let you know so. Before we get started, I want to let you know that we will talk about how superior and great you are in your own right, but you should be reminded that you did not get here on your own. You brought mom, dad, grandmom, granddad, brother, sister, cousin, whomever with you. Give them a round of applause. I want to do a little bit of expectation setting real quickly, and I'm probably going off script. I don't know what's being said behind me. Half of my family are preachers, and that has implications for you. So first of all, I'm going to go a little bit longer than they told me I could go because that's the black preaching tradition. Secondly, participation is a must. If you hear something that sounds good to you or that you agree with, it's all right to clap, it's all right to holler, it's all right to give a couple of amens every now and then, so we will expect that. All right. Now let me test this one because I'm not one of the preachers. There's no minister and reverend in front of my name, so if it gets really good to you, somebody say, hell yeah. So here we go. At the risk of getting off on the wrong foot, we're going to start today by talking about jazz. All right. A pattern is being established. I love it. Now, some of you just said to yourselves, like that person, wow, this may be pretty cool, and you perked up in your seat. Others of you rolled your eyes, and I can see some of you, and you said, wake me when this clown is done. I fancy myself a little bit of a risk taker, so we'll do some risk taking today, and I'm going to proceed down this path. Please trust me that this is going somewhere. So jazz, we're not going to talk about the music per se. I could do that all day with you and would love to do it, but instead we're going to talk about two of the form's greatest contributors, pianist Herbie Hancock and saxophonist Wayne Shorter. In March of this year, these two cultural luminaries issued a letter to the next generation. In it, Hancock and Shorter offer guidance about navigating and creating in a conflicted world with the hope and expectation that artists and young people will use their efforts to bring justice, community, and life into the world. While the letter is directed at artists, Hancock and Shorter are careful to note that they are sharing the letter for the benefit of all. The jazz icons begin by saying, we find ourselves in turbulent and unpredictable times. From the horror of the Bataclan in Paris to the upheaval in Syria and the senseless bloodshed in San Bernardino, we live in a time of great confusion and pain. As artists, creators, and dreamers of this world, we ask you not to be discouraged by what you see, but to use your own lives and by extension your art as vehicles for the construction of peace. While the world events that they reference often orbit our formal learning settings too distantly for us to fully grapple with the meaning, it's true that we can point to more proximate turbulence and unpredictability in our schools and in our communities. Events and circumstances that probably keep you up at night and may be the reason that compelled you to take this giant leap into education. Maybe it's our collective worry over inequitable school quality in many places across America that disturbingly overlay with race and economic status. Perhaps it's the growing disaster of adults' ideological wars over learning standards and charter schools that distract us from simply doing the work of making sure that there are a variety of high-quality options for every learner. Maybe it's that we feel a sense of overwhelm because our holy grail goal of interrupting poverty and disparity through education seems as distant as ever. However we might name the education-related analogs, to the catastrophes that Hancock and Shorter cite, they remind us not to be discouraged. They say that while it's true that issues facing the world are complex, the answer to peace and change is simple. It begins with you. We are all pieces in a giant fluid puzzle where the smallest actions by one puzzle piece profoundly affect each of the others. You matter, your actions matter, and your art matters, they say. By extension, I'm here to tell you that you matter, your actions matter, and the expertise and skill that you've built here at SAD and in the field matters. Now, there are several additional themes that stand out in the letter, and I'm not going to recount all of you. I would please urge you, read this letter. It is both inspiring and instructive, but perhaps the guidance that they offer that's most germane to the work in our shared journey in education is that we embrace and conquer the roads less traveled. Hancock and Shorter say in the letter, the world needs new pathways. Don't allow yourself to be hijacked by common rhetoric or false beliefs and illusions about how life should be lived, or in our case, how intellectual and spiritual development should occur. It's up to you to be the pioneers. We encourage you to dispel repetition in all of its negative forms and consequences. Strive to create new actions and never conform. Never conform. I find these to be a very powerful set of messages, but I think we have to unpack them and discuss them a little bit if we're going to interpret them in ways that become practical for us in education. So Hancock and Shorter, I think, are telling us to do two basic things. First of all, figure out how to create and choose the new pathways that are more likely to lead to the transformation that we desire. Secondly, develop and fulfill the new roles that will be required to instigate change. This is what I think they're asking you and me to do when they declare that it's up to us to be pioneers. So let's talk about the pathways building and the new role creation a little bit. First, if we're going to create and choose new paths that facilitate the transformation that we want, I think we've got to do at least three things. First of all, we've got to get more serious about building innovation cultures in schools and school systems. Secondly, we've got to get better at anticipating the future that we are preparing young people for. Lastly, if our aim is to change several dimensions of young people's lives, we may have to consider that school may not be enough to get the job done. Blazing new paths, as the jazz icon suggests, requires innovation, and I'm not so sure that the conditions for innovation exist in most of our schools and school systems. First, most school cultures don't incentivize entrepreneurial effort among educators or create the white space that they need to question the status quo and current practices. We need cultures that unleash educators, not constrain our professionals. Secondly, schools and school systems don't tolerate risk very well, and hence they often play at the margins of innovation. And I get it. In education, risk can be hard to substantiate because we don't want to gamble with young people's lives. This said, we need breakthroughs, and the very young people that we're talking about can't brave the status quo too much longer. We have to create the conditions for calculated risk precisely to ensure that innovating is not gambling. Third, schools, despite their missions, are not always learning communities or learning organizations. They don't necessarily seek and process knowledge, assess their work and results in structured ways, or make decisive changes based on data, lessons learned, and ongoing reflection. Schools must learn to do this. Lastly, innovation requires that we practice perspective taking and make a habit of taking the long view. Unfortunately, taking the long view is often a luxury for educators in compliance-driven, accountability-first cultures. Now, I saved this last point for last in the list because it deserves special emphasis and is critical in and of itself to embracing and conquering the roads less traveled. To put a finer point on it, not only do we have to take the long view, but we've got to get really good at anticipating the future. Why? Because our primary task as educators is to prepare students to be agents in an increasingly complex world. If we aren't anticipating students' future needs, how work and career will be structured in the decades to come, and a host of social, economic, and political trends with some level of precision, I would argue that we don't have a good handle on the knowledge and skill that we should be equipping young people with. Consider the following. Futurist Thomas Frey predicts that 60% of the best jobs over the next decade have not been invented yet. Trend forecasting groups like Sparks and Honey suggest that careers are more complex, fragmented, specialized, and collaborative than ever, and this trajectory will only continue. Children in our schools today will not be able to say when and if they retire. I don't know how many of us are actually going to be able to retire, but they will not be able to say that they were career educators, career doctors, career lawyers. Their work histories will likely be a portfolio of micro-careers that are very cross-disciplinary and unbounded in traditional ways. The future we are talking about, some say, may be as skills-dependent as it is knowledge-dependent. Entrepreneurial prowess and the ability to create value may trump your degree in the future. The foreseeable future may be even more dependent on social capital and your ability to maintain a set of broad networks. And consider that we are preparing a generation of learners that we are only beginning to understand. Generation Z, the folks who were born after 1994. This is a group of young people who are not just tech savvy, but they are tech innate, living on many screens at once. They're provocatively challenging identity constructs. They're highly communal and networked, eager to work and participate in the economy, and entrepreneurism is in their DNA. If you consider all of these things, then the pathways that we create will have to meet the students that we're working with now, not only where they are now, but where they're likely to be. And you and I have to admit that both of those places are often somewhere way ahead of us. Now, this orientation towards the future does have to be balanced by meeting many groups of students that we've left behind where they are. Thank you. A variety of data tell us that we've put several groups of students well behind the starting line and have made the finish line largely unattainable because we've systematically failed to meet their needs inside and outside of the classroom. So we have a simultaneous challenge here. We've got to create new approaches, supports, interventions, and opportunities that both facilitate the corrective justice work that is needed and that keeps young people on pace with a future that is evolving at an exponential rate. One of the assumptions that I'm going to make is that the talent is in this room to get the job done. I'm going to assume that you can create the new pathways, the new possibilities inside of our systems that unlock learning for our young people. I also want to assume, though, and submit to you that much of the innovation work that we need to do needs to take place outside of school walls and systems and in concert with an ecosystem of human and community supports. We who toil in and are deeply interested in and deeply invested in education expect that great schools will, at minimum, prepare every young person for college, career, and a productive life. More hopefully, we expect schools to feed our democracy, building competent citizenship and leadership through the education process. We also expect that great schools will counter the country's vestigial racism, sexism, and classism, leveling the societal playing field by giving young people an equal start and similarly equal access to opportunity. Embedded in this hope are a set of expectations that school, when perfected, is a mega inoculation, a sort of super silver bullet. And while we should not question the power of school or its potential to prepare every young person for success in all aspects of life, we should check are silver bullet assumptions. Former Massachusetts Secretary of Education Paul Reville wrote in an article some years ago, when standards-based reform was enacted in Massachusetts, we celebrated that victory by declaring we were going to eliminate the correlation between zip code and educational attainment. He went on to say that 2 decades later, it is clear that we failed to meet the challenge precisely because schools as currently conceived are too weak an intervention. Even when optimized with high expectations, strong curriculum, and expert instruction, today's schools have not proven powerful enough by themselves to compensate for the disadvantages associated with poverty. This suggests that new pathways and new solutions that advance us closer to our human capital building and our justice-aspiring goals might need to deviate from our preoccupation with trying to fix school. Now, don't go telling people that I was up here saying we don't need school improvement. In fact, it is not what I'm saying. I do believe that when we get schools to consistently meet the instructional needs of all learners, it will be game-changing on its own terms. So please do the innovation work, do the future projecting work that we just talked about. Now, what I am saying is that the preoccupation with fixing school, accompanied by this belief that it's going to be a silver bullet, may be compromising our ability to effectively respond to the array of contextual factors that define the lives of young people and their families. If you take anything away from these remarks, let it be this: we are not just looking to fix schools, we're looking for breakthroughs in human development. The paths that get us to human development breakthroughs likely originate at critical intersection points between education, health and human services, and economic development. That's a shout out to John Barrows. I hear he's in the audience somewhere. All right, I see you. We need to build a set of paths that are explicitly purposed to break silos, integrate policy and practice areas that are mostly separated by our own mental constructs, and that start to weave together something that looks more like the recourse that students and families actually need, but that school can't provide on its own. Quite simply, the education community can no longer afford to assume its own primacy and act as though it's a world unto itself. So you got all that? All right. You guys have a lot of work to do. So let's quickly talk about the roles you're going to have to play to activate all of this stuff. And I think it goes without saying that we're going to have to imagine some new ways of working and some new ways of being. And that's basically what Hancock and Shorter tell us when they say, go out and be pioneers. So what does pioneering look like in the work that we're doing? What does the role redefinition look like? The answers to the question can probably take us as far as our minds want to wander. Again, Thomas Frey tells us that many of the roles that we need in the next 10 years, 25 years, have not been invented yet. So please, be imaginative, be virally imaginative. But I'll suggest to you that we also have to revisit some of the traditional roles: teacher, administrator, school leader, superintendent, policymaker. Job responsibilities for some of these old titles will need to be modified to ensure that future education professionals increasingly orient their work towards curating learning opportunities and helping students not only navigate planned lessons in the syllabus, but an ecosystem of content-rich and interactive learning experiences. You're going to increasingly have to become technicians, mastering a staggering array of technology-based supports and figuring out how to optimize these tools to the benefit of every learner. As we said, you're going to have to figure out how to build the bridges and the connective tissues across systems and institutions so that we can glue this larger human development system together. Maybe one way to sum it up is that future educators are going to have to be organizers. Now, this might not sound, thank you. Now, this might not sound very revolutionary, but let me explain a little bit more and maybe it will become compelling to you. The key concept that we often miss when talking about organizing is that there's a difference between mobilizing and organizing. Labor organizer Andy Stern draws this important and resonant distinction. He says that mobilizing is about creating a critical mass of people and voices to frame and deliberate public challenges. It's the process of giving public weight to community grievances, and we always need that. On the other hand, organizing, he says, is about coordinating people to create alternatives to unjust and ineffective policies, systems, and structures. That's what future educators have to do. The example that he uses is the credit union movement. When redlining and discriminatory practices in lending were increasingly used to destabilize neighborhoods in American cities and lock poor people and communities of color out of opportunity, organizers in this country accelerated the creation of new credit unions and practices that allowed some communities to thrive outside of the commercial banking system. Future educators are going to have to actively create solutions to seemingly intractable challenges and create alternatives to approaches that are falling short of our intentions. Understood this way, we've got to become organizers to imagine and activate a different set of possibilities for young people and their families. Now, becoming organizers of this type is a necessary role shift, but it doesn't speak to the complete shift in role that has to happen if we're going to pave the way for advancements in education and human development. We've also got to become active champions for justice. Transformation that we need in and beyond education falls flat without moral direction, a redefined equity lens, and the courage to undo legacy structures that skew power and hold up privilege. Some may take issue with this statement and counter that what we really need is insightful, fine-tuned policy, keen, sharpened classroom technique, and of course, powerful school and school district leadership. And I don't take any exception to any of these assertions. However, I do want to push back and say that if there's not an active love for justice in the work and an infusion of deeply justice-rooted values, then we're largely being agnostic of the young person who is sitting in front of us, and what we are bound to get at best is marginal and incremental improvement. At worst, and this danger is clear and present, policy and practice that is uninformed by a sense of justice just perpetuates inequity and underperformance. And until we declare that everyone in this country, regardless of race, country of origin, class, or gender, deserves access to quality instruction and support, and some more than others precisely because we have given them less of it for generations, education will fall short of its justice potential. It will fall short of its justice potential if we make a justice declaration that is not backed up with a strong and courageous equity commitment that, first of all, clarifies that equity is not equality, because fairness, which is equity, and sameness, which is equality, is not the same thing. A strong and courageous equity commitment names names and is clear about whom we have to do more for to level the playing field. A strong equity commitment does the status quo upsetting work of confronting and renegotiating privilege. And if you don't believe it, know now that privilege has to be renegotiated if we're going to get to equity. So I don't know what to call these roles, these innovator, organizer, champion, activist roles that we're trying to create. They're all something big that we have to name and imagine with one another. But as we're figuring out what they are, let's make sure that all of them are infused with humility. We need humility lest we begin to believe that we are saviors. And let's be clear, we're servants, we're not saviors. Saviors tend to see young people and their families through the lenses of pity and charity, and in some instances are searching for ways to exercise their own guilt about living in an inequitable society. Young people, people of color, low-income families don't need us to save them and don't need us to do our work with condescension. What they want are allies, partners, and recourse in the form of helpmates to execute their plans for their lives and to work with them to fully become whom they already are. So there's a great set of expeditionary tasks ahead of us, seeking and navigating untraveled paths, reimagining our work and ourselves. Were I speaking to another audience, I would be worried that the job might be too big. I'd be worried that it's too nebulous and too abstract. I'd be worried that maybe it's fraught with too much danger and conflict because it will be about clarifying and living out your values, which may be the very definition of struggle in some ways. But I'm not worried because you are SED trained and prepared. This means that you're prepared for much of what comes your way. You're ready to take the road less traveled, and you've got a community of folks who have your back. You're ready to make the full breadth of your scholarship practical. You're ready to be role models through your own learning, to bring your full humanity to your profession, and to explore the frontiers of learning and development. To end, I want to read a final excerpt from the letter that Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter authored, because I think it's particularly apropos for educators and is a message that we have to own if we are going to embrace and conquer roads less traveled. Hancock's and Shorter's final directive to us is live in a constant state of wonder. This is what they say. As we accumulate years, parts of our imagination tend to dull. Whether from sadness, prolonged struggle, or social conditioning, somewhere along the way, people forget how to tap into the inherent magic that exists in our minds. Don't let that part of your imagination fade. Look up at the stars and imagine what it would be like to be an astronaut or a pilot. Imagine flying like a bird or crashing through a wall like Superman. Imagine exploring the pyramids or Machu Picchu. Imagine running with dinosaurs or swimming like mer creatures. All that exists is a product of someone's imagination. Treasure and nurture yours, and you'll always find yourself on the precipice of discovery. I hope that I've said something edifying for you today. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.